Hey everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. So, in recent time, we've had quite a few people join the community here, so to speak. And one thing that I often will do towards the middle of the month and also the end of the month is we'll go over the 30-day forecast for next month. Since we're in the middle of the month now, we're going to be looking at April from this point. One disclaimer here, of course, this is looking at 30-day forecast as an average. This is not going to be what every day is going to look like. So if you see these maps and you're seeing a less than desirable outcome for your area, do not panic. This is just an average. There's still going to be potentially a mixture of warm or cold or wet and dry days for your area in most cases. There are some going to be some situations on this map in particular where it might be a little bit drier than what you would want it to be. All of it, of course, depends on area and, of course, weather patterns. And those forecast videos will highlight whenever we will get to the more of the extremes in particular. That being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the temperature outlook here. So what I'm seeing here right now based off of this isn't too far out of the norm for what we would see from April here, especially with the shifting into the neutral ENSO for right now. It's no secret that we've been expecting this shift for a while here. So to anyone that is curious, by the way, a neutral ENSO is a situation in which waters that are actually out all the way over towards the Pacific could be right about at average, I would say, maybe just a tad bit above or below. In this case, it would be a tiny bit below, but the significance would be about less than half a degree. It could be half a degree warmer or half a degree cooler. That is where our neutral ENSO range is. This affects our weather pretty significantly. Where, for example, this last season we had a big La Nina here, and whenever we tend to have La Ninas, we tend to have a little bit more in the way of severe weather. It's not always a guarantee. Other factors, of course, play into it. That's usually one of the first warning signs that we will often end up looking for. But yeah, we're going to be sticking with the ENSO neutral trend here for quite a while from this point. So spring and summer as a whole are going to end up kind of being a little bit more towards average, I would say. So hurricane season, all that stuff could be affected by this as well. We'll have videos on that in the very near future. So make sure if you're watching this and you're new here, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and get that notification bell on to stay updated with that. That being said, though, getting back to the temperature map. So, as you can see, over towards the New England region, we're expecting a decent amount of confidence for above average temperatures here. The greatest areas of above average temperature confidence is going to, of course, be over towards the Florida Peninsula and then over towards the desert Southwest and South Texas. Like I said, this is not uncommon. We see this pretty often once we start to get into spring and then into summer. These areas often end up being pretty hot. You can ask a lot of the natives there. But in any case, though, I would expect an increase in temperature, especially over towards southern Texas. I've been already seeing over the course of a few weeks here, we've seen weather models pushing these areas into the mid to upper 80s. Some 90s will probably be starting to pop up here pretty soon at this point. Same can be said for that Florida Peninsula. As time goes on, we'll probably see these higher temperature probabilities even start to work their way up towards the south. Now, keep in mind, the one thing that I always say when it comes to this first outlook here, because this is the first of two for the month, because we do this again at the end of the month, is that this could still end up looking different. These areas where we see those above average probabilities being in the 50 to 60 percentile, which you can see in the color code here, this may very well shift a little bit further towards the north. I wouldn't be surprised to see South Georgia involved in that as well, and maybe even as far west as maybe southern Alabama and a good chunk of the Florida panhandle as well. The Gulf Coast is still a little bit in question for me at this point, but I would say that there is an equal chance that you might end up getting an increase in the probability here. Although, like I said, nothing's really a shoo-in at this point. Wouldn't surprise me to see a little bit more of Texas included in it as well. Also would say Houston in particular. I think there's a good chance as well. So the rest of these areas here in the white, by the way, these are equal chances for above or below average temperatures here. Probabilities are kind of equal at this juncture. I would mainly expect us to stay closer towards near normal, but there could be some swing days that influence the final outcome of this. Of course, we'll see what ultimately ends up coming to be on the end of at the very end of the month on the 31st with that outlook. So one area of interest that I'm keeping a close eye on, of course, is the Northwest in particular. A big area of interest that could influence that also is over towards Alaska, where right now we're seeing equal chances, but there is an area off towards western Alaska that has below average temperature probabilities. If this by some chance were to shift a little bit further to the south, that could influence some of the results over here, and also could be a sign of a slightly more active weather pattern. Right now we're not seeing a very prominent look on models here, which we'll get into a little bit later, but even so, based off the shape of this here, it does look like we have a storm track that does shift a little bit further towards the south, especially over towards the Ohio Valley. And we also see that kind of backed up here in our precipitation outlook. You can see that the Northwest is still active here for the most part. We still have a good above average precip probability over here. We're even getting into the 40 to 50 percentile range. And then also this area, if you go back to what I was talking about earlier, this kind of almost has the look of a trough here, so it kind of favors the storm pattern. And then if you match it with this, you can see that over towards the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley, especially over towards the Ohio Valley Midwest region here, we have above average precip probabilities there as well. Now, where we're going to be seeing a little bit of a drop off in weather activity potentially is going to be over towards Florida right now. This is a little bit closer towards your dry season, so it's not unheard of. Typically, we begin to do our catching up within the next couple of months anyway, so by the time we get towards May and June, we start to see more of those onshore flows, and then we end up getting those showers and thunderstorms there. If you're over here towards the southwest, unfortunately, this of course is your dry season as well, but once we start to settle into a dry season, we end up staying there for a little bit more often than not. Monsoon season is ways off for now, so fortunately, this is most likely going to verify. In any case, though, these are areas that I would also practice a lot of fire safety, especially since Smokey's been defunded. But only you can help prevent forest fires. That's all I'm going to say there. All joking aside, though, I expect conditions to remain pretty dry over there throughout the month of April and probably heading into even May at this point. Like I said, we'll see what the spring outlook has to offer in due time here. It's going to be the final spring outlook for the channel, by the way. But in any case, though, if we were to go ahead and take a look at Alaska here, just to kind of get an idea of what the Northwest could be dealing with in regards to additional precip. Right now, it's kind of looking like we're dealing with equal chances for precip across the board for most of the state. Could be a little bit drier towards the southwestern part of Alaska, which doesn't really affect quite as much of the U.S., I would say, as maybe southern Alaska as a whole. But it could be a sign of the times here. There may be some changes ahead. So going forward, looking at the weather models here, what I'm paying the most attention to from this look are two oscillations here. We're looking at the NAO region, which is over here towards Greenland in particular, and then we're looking at the Arctic Circle here. There's an oscillation here as well. It's called the Arctic oscillation. So this is the AO and this is the NAO. And what I'm paying attention to are these two pressure gradients that we end up seeing here. This region here is showing a cold air mass, which is going to ultimately affect mostly the eastern half of the state as the typical, which is a classic negative NAO phase here. So cold air makes it kind of far to the south here. This is heading towards the very end of the month. Do have maybe some chances of some inclement weather as a result of that. Not to say just what that could be. Do think showers and storms will be possible, and that's going to be a prominent trend as we go into the following week as well. There's also a neutral phase, I would go as far as to say, in regards to the AO region. So we might have some cold air dipping into the western half of the U.S. here as we get into the following week, and we'll go ahead and go to that next slide. You can see that big cold air mass, that blue bowling ball, working its way into the northwest, and then it's going to be pushing its way to the east here. We still see a relatively negative NAO phase here, so we're going to have warm and cold air kind of clashing with each other. So this first week of April could be pretty active. As we go further along here, we start to see a warm air mass begin to build, and as a result, this will probably help calm the weather down just a little bit as we get into early to mid-April. As we go further along here, a little bit more uncertain of what this look has to offer here. It does look like we have two different positive oscillations here. We have the positive AO and the positive NAO. So it looks like we're going to have a pretty big warm up as we get towards the end of April here, but we'll have to see how things ultimately pan out. And then this could be how we end up closing out April and starting out May as well. But of course, 6 weeks out, as far as model guidance is concerned, a lot can change. But if we were to go off of the outcomes that we saw there, I would expect to see a major increase as we go further along here with our above average temperatures here. And we could have some pretty anomalous numbers to go along with it. As we get into that first week of April here, in particular over towards the central part of the U.S., this is where we could see temperatures maybe as high as about maybe 20, potentially even 30 degrees above average, especially over towards Oklahoma and Texas in particular. Everywhere else we're kind of about we're spanning about maybe 10, 15, 20 degrees above average across the board here. The darker the colors here, of course, obviously the higher the temperature anomaly. But these brighter colors getting into almost, I would say, pink at this point. Not going to get into color debate with you guys, by the way. But this area in particular is the area I would be most concerned with in regards to our above average temperatures here. As we go into the next week here, you can start to see some of that cold air that we were talking about seeping into the northwest here. We could potentially see about maybe 15, even 20 degrees below average here for a brief period. Eventually, though, by the next week, that kind of fades out. And then we don't have such an anomalous signal over here for above average temperatures across the deep south over here in the southern plains. And then eventually, if anything, we start to maybe show signs of a shift towards a positive PNA, which is a setup in which the west ends up being above average in regards to its temperatures and maybe out towards the east we're slightly below. It's not a super predominant signal at this point. Obviously, like I said, with the weather model we were looking at earlier, 6 weeks out, it's a long way to look. So be prepared for some changes by the time we get towards the end of this month in regards to this outlook here. So lastly, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our precipitation anomaly here. Areas in the yellow is where we're expecting drier than average conditions. Green is, of course, wetter than average. Over towards the northeast over here and over towards the Ohio Valley, which was where we were kind of expecting those above average numbers to be. We're going to see that, of course, heading into next week. And over towards the northwest, we're kind of busy right now. As we go into the following week, you can actually see that there is a storm system that we're going to be keeping an eye on out towards the Ozark region and, of course, the Ohio Valley. We have some pretty good numbers over here. We could potentially see maybe an inch or two above average towards these regions. Then the northwest is pretty active right now. Another storm system rolling through, of course, will aid in those numbers as well. As we get to the 10th and beyond here, it's where we start to see the weather pattern begin to quiet down, and we're going to see those drier than average areas kind of on an increase here. Then as we get towards the end of the month of April, heading into May, this is where we kind of level off a little bit. Over towards the deep southeast here, maybe we could still see some slightly drier than average conditions, with the driest being over here towards the Gulf Coast. Not to say that this area in particular will see no rain, but could be a little bit drier than what we're used to seeing. That's just the joy of springtime, honestly, at this point. But that being said, that's all we have here for this video. Make sure you stay tuned for the spring and summer outlooks, which will be coming within the next week or two. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I will see you tomorrow with a severe weather outlook. Till then, take care of yourselves and have an awesome day.